Doug, somebody writes in to say, I heard an Arminian apologist say that Romans 9 and the Old Testament verses quoted therein have nothing to do with salvation of the individuals proper. I'm not an Arminian, but his point resonated a bit on second glance. Is he wrong? Is individual salvation in the scope of Paul's argument?
Okay, your Arminian friend is not wrong, but he's holding it upside down.
Okay.
Okay, so if you were to ask in Romans 8, 9, 10, and 11, is corporate election an issue? Are we dealing with corporate, national, ethnic entities?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is absolutely yes, but it's the question, not the answer. Okay, so what I mean is this. In that passage where Paul says, Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated.
Yeah.
That's not talking about Jacob and Esau, the individuals. That's talking about Israel and Edom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a quotation from Hosea. I think it's Hosea. Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated, and it's talking about the corporate, those nations.
Yeah.
Okay, so the questioner is right. If he points to things like that and says, "Hey, this is a corporate reality," I'd say, yeah, absolutely, that's absolutely right. But two things in response. It doesn't really help you, oh Arminian friend, to say the Bible nowhere says that God predestined that this man die in a fiery plane crash. God only predestined that the plane would crash, not that the passengers would. Okay. Well, these corporate entities are made up of individuals, and if God hates Edom, that has that has an effect on Edomites. Right. So that's one thing. The second thing is this corporate reality is what Paul is wrestling with when he goes into that whole section of Romans. So at the end of Romans 8, he has this wonderful, exultant, triumphal, who will lay a charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Mm-hmm. Neither height nor depth nor present nor future can separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus. Nothing can separate the elect from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Well, that opens the door to Romans 9, because the clever questioner in the Q&A section says, excuse me, Paul, if nothing can separate the elect from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus, then why are the elect of God, the Israelites, chasing you around the Mediterranean trying to get you killed? Mm-hmm. Why are the elect of God hating the gospel, opposing the gospel? Why did the elect of God crucify their Messiah? What are you talking about? Uh-huh. Right? And Paul's answer to that is, he says, not all, right at the beginning of Romans 9, he says, not all Israel are Israel. All right, so there's an Israel within Israel.
Okay.
All right, so there's the corporate election, mm-hmm. and then there's the genuine, real deal election within that. Now, the real deal election that is true of the, nothing can separate us from, from the love of God, that has to pertain to individuals, because it's the individual who's exulting at the end of Romans 8, who will lay a charge against God's elect. Right. If you just said, who will lay a charge against corporate entities like Israel, pretty much anybody. Mm-hmm. Right. Right? The Apostle Paul himself lays a charge against corporate Israel in chapter 2 of Romans. So in order to have the exultant, triumphant, thanks be to God who gives us the victory, that has to pertain to someone whose salvation is beyond the reach of the world, the flesh, and the devil.
Okay. If somebody's trying to wrestle through that section of Romans, what commentators out there do you think get it best or are closest? Is there anybody you'd say this is the guy to read, either on that section or maybe just the whole book of Romans?
I would say Calvin is always good.
Yeah.
So I would say I think you could. Calvin is good. I would trust Haldane on that. I would say, in fact, the one thing I would not trust, I'll just put it this way.
Okay.
The one I would not trust is your own heart.
Huh. Okay.
Okay. So I think anybody, Calvinist, Arminian, open, seeker, whatever, should sit down and, when he comes to those chapters, surrender the point in principle.
Yeah.
Okay? Say, God, I don't know what the text says here. I honestly don't. I've not studied it yet. But I'm willing to come out the other end a Calvinist. I'm willing to come out the other end an Arminian if that's what the text requires.
Okay.
I'm willing to surrender the whole thing. Generally, any Reformed commentators are pretty responsible with the.
But so if somebody closes the Bible and says, "But do you really think? Do you really feel?"
Right. I had a friend when I was going through all this, and that was the turning point for me. Incidentally, is where I prayed. I was awfully big of me, I'm sure, but I prayed and said, God, I'm willing for this to be true. You know, and up to that time I was big. I just wasn't willing for the text to tell me certain things. Now, when I surrendered and said, I'm willing for this to be true, I wasn't a Calvinist 2 seconds later, but I wasn't bigoted. I was open to what the text said. And when I was going through this whole process, one point in there, shortly after I had come to this understanding, I was talking to a friend, and the question came up, and I opened my Bible, and he said, "Put that away." You know.
Yeah, that's enough right there.
Yeah.
So to push a little bit further on that, the new perspective, when you're reading N.T. Wright and those characters, what did they add to your reading of this section? And is there a part where you say, but I can't go there?
I think what they're saying has some value in places like Romans 7, where they would see the first person account that Paul gives of his own struggle with sin as a paradigmatic representation of Israel.
Okay.
Right. I think that they sometimes see corporate realities and ethnic boundaries in ways that really are helpful in parsing out certain parts of the text. But I don't find them helpful in the Calvinist.
Okay.
The Calvinist chapters.
Sure.
Because I think there's too much hand waving, and it's not Arminian. It's not Arminianism, but it's like Arminianism in that corporate, and then we don't have to deal with the plane crashed, but we don't have to go through the passenger roster. No, come on. If all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to His purpose, that has to parse out individually.
Okay. Thanks.